Hi, Nick Dogan, North State Law. We safeguard your professional license so you can get back to business. Today, we're going to talk about the 4 reasons for hiring a professional licensed attorney. So, I didn't say professional licensed defense only there, although that is part of it. There's also professional license acquisition, and we'll talk about that in one of the 4 reasons. But first off, we're going to talk about the most obvious one, because why not? So, the first one is this is a very nuanced or niche area of law. I've been practicing law since 2008. I've done a lot of different areas of law, starting off with criminal defense. I've done family law. I've done civil litigation. I've even done a couple of special proceedings in relating to real estate conflict back in the day. But when I started my practice in 2019, focusing just on professional licensing law, it really was one thing that not a lot of firms, specifically did. It would always be like, well, especially if it was a big firm. All right, well, we do everything under the sun. They might hire might have a construction firm that hires them, and then further down the line when they're helping them out with their business structure and stuff, maybe something pops up that there's a complaint, and then they have like an associate handle the professional license case, and an associate might do a fine job, but there's not a lot of firms even now that only do professional licensing cases. So it's very important to have somebody that knows the ins and outs of what, not only like the process for all these boards, but also like who the players are, for lack of better phrasing, right? So a lot of these boards are going to be represented by an attorney, either with a firm that is contracted with them to provide legal services. So it'll be kind of like outside counsel, or they're going to have inside counsel, or they will be represented by the AG's office, Attorney General's office. So that's more of like if they're a state agency. Some boards, like the Private Protective Services Board, is technically a state agency because it's under the Department of Public Safety. So, having somewhat of a relationship with the opposing counsel, and the more frequently you interact with that person, it really matters. It makes a huge difference, to be quite frank with you, because you happen to see tendencies from the other side. You have a better relationship. You probably get a better rapport. You kind of have an idea of what your client's going to be facing when they see the other attorney, and as you have more and more cases with that attorney and eventually end up with more hearings, you kind of get a pretty good idea how good of a litigator, or what the people call now a trial attorney, they are. And that kind of gives you a very good sense of, is it worth having a hearing? And a lot of times, if you've had a hearing with somebody and you might think, all right, well, they're pretty on their toes. They present a good case. They're solid, or hey, they're really good. We got to really have a lot of evidence on our side to have a good chance of success. Then that's probably going to lean you more towards wanting to come up with a compromise. Versus if you've had hearings with somebody and you've noticed that maybe they're not as crisp as they could be, or maybe that they don't really know the rules of evidence very well, or they kind of struggle on their closing statements, or they're not very good at cross-examination of witnesses. So you're kind of learning some tendencies as you have more and more hearings with these attorneys that represent these boards and state agencies. So it is very crucial to have somebody that is in this niche area of law. So whether it's contacting my firm, North State Law, or contacting one of the other firms throughout the state of North Carolina that only does professional licensing, defense, and professional license acquisition, I mean, it does make a difference because, like I said, I mean, you're interacting with the same people over and over again. If you're in front of a board a lot, you're going to get to know some of those people, and some of those people are going to get to know you. So it does make a difference. Let's go on to the second one. Second one we got is this kind of spills over from the last, the last tip, and the last reason is, there's different processes and different procedures with pretty much every board. And some of them have the same process. Some of them have very, very similar process. But you can even get into different healthcare fields, and they will have a little wrinkle that the other profession doesn't have. And I'll take nurses and so the nursing board and the medical board, for example. Um, when it comes to protection of the files, which would be patient files, they're very restrictive of that. And there is an understanding as to why, obviously, because you're dealing with somebody's health records. But the key difference between the two of those is, excuse me, you cannot acquire, per statute, you cannot acquire the documents from the nursing board. Like it's clearly written out in the Nursing Practice Act that they cannot provide you with those documents. They can only provide you with documents related to that case if they're going to use them at a hearing as an exhibit. Then you're entitled to them, and they'll provide those to you. If you start the case and you are looking to see the documents, you can, but you have to agree with an interview with an investigator with the nursing board. Now, versus the medical board, they put the onus on the licensee to provide them the medical files. So if let's say it's a physician that's accused of something, let's say that there was a settlement of $80,000. So that's above the statutory threshold where that has to be reported to the board. There was a civil lawsuit settled for $80,000. That's reported to the board. Board comes back and say, all right, well, you've got 45 days to produce these medical records. If you need more time, just ask. And the doctor is going to reach out to their office. They're going to provide documentation over to the physician. The physician is going to get it over to the board. So the physician is going to know the information that the medical board has. So that's just one of the quirks between those two boards, and those two boards are are both healthcare professionals. And then you got other ones in the healthcare realm, with physical therapists, for example. Their process is going to be different than both the medical board and the nursing board. When you get into the trades, and you're talking about electricians, or you're talking about plumbers or general contractors, their initial process is actually a little bit different between the three of them. Plumbing and the electrical board, plumbing and HVAC board versus electrical board is very, very, very similar, almost exact, but there's still, a couple little nuances there. Versus the general contracting board, there's a good bit of difference between that and the electrical board and the plumbing HVAC board. So it really, it behooves you to, at the very least, speak with an attorney. And if you decide, all right, well, I got a good idea of what the process is now, I'm gonna try to do it myself, then via con Dios, that's that's perfectly fine. But as the case progresses, there's going to be more than likely other things that pop up that are not going to be written in the statutes, not going to be written in the codes for these boards and agencies that the general public's probably not going to know about, that you're only really going to know about if you've actually gone through the process with these boards and agencies, a handful of times. So, and speaking of the statutes and codes, some of the boards and agencies, they don't really lay out what their process is very clearly or at all in their administrative code. And a lot of times it's not in the statute. So again, it's one of those things where, if it's not in the code, it's not in the statute, and they don't provide that information to you when they send you a notice that a complaint's been filed, then you're kind of figuring it out unless you speak with somebody that's been through that before. So that's the second big one. And then the other one is, don't think for a second that an investigator from one of these boards or state agencies is your friend. They're not. And no disrespect to them, they got a job to do like the rest of us. We all got a job to do. We all got to pay the bills. We all make some money. We got to put shoes on your kids' feet, that sort of thing. So no disrespect to them at all. They're out there making a living. They're doing their thing, doing their job. And it's perfectly understandable. But a lot of times, and they'll even do it when we're representing the client, and if the client's fine and we're fine with the client agreeing to an interview with an investigator, they'll be very nice. And I appreciate that on a professional level. I really, really do, because there's no point in being rude. But where I've seen some clients get tripped up, they'll come to us after the fact of speaking with an investigator, and man, he or she was like, they were really nice for that first 10 minutes, and then As we got deeper and deeper into it, they were less and less nice, and they were asking some really hard, tough questions, and they were asking them questions, a different way, but the same question, and so on and so forth. And it's like, yeah, that's how they're trained to do it. And with some of these boards, you'll have ex law enforcement officers, somebody that's been doing this stuff for 30 years on a law enforcement professional level. They know exactly what they're doing when they're interviewing somebody, and they're very good at it. So you don't want to go in there ill prepared. And sometimes if you get the opportunity to say, you know what, I appreciate the offer, I don't really want to do that, and you're not comfortable with it, then you might not have to do it. Now, the other thing, and this goes back to the nuance example I was talking about earlier, some boards and agencies, they have it in their administrative code or their general statute that you have to fully cooperate with an investigation. And that would mean speaking with an investigator of the board or agency. And if you don't know that, then you're kind of at a disadvantage as well, because you could be thinking for a second, like, I don't have to talk to this person. And, you blow it off or you ignore them or something. And then it progresses from there. And then boom, a new complaint pops up. Well, you didn't cooperate with us, and it's a violation of this code or the statute. Or you could say like, oh, well, I'm scared to death. I don't want to mess up. I have to cooperate with this person. And then it might be one of those boards or agencies where, you're not required to cooperate with anybody. And you might end up doing yourself more harm than good by doing that. And then you've got your other stuff where even if it's voluntary, you might be better off talking to somebody because you didn't do anything wrong. You want to prepare yourself and be ready to go and, write your thoughts down, go over questions or a little bit of both. And boom, you go, you tell your side of the story truthfully, honestly, and most importantly, in the correct way where you're conveying your story very, forthright and very direct with the interviewer, and everything goes well and it works out in your favor. So you really have to know, again, who the players are, which goes back to the investigators as well. And then you also need to know the rules, and who better to know the rules than an attorney that practices this area of law. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. The next one is depending on the border agency and an applicant's background, there might be an issue with an application. So, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, when we're talking about professional licensing laws, it's not just professional license defense. It's also professional license acquisition or acquisition of a professional license. So if an individual is applying, they went to school, they got whatever degree, and I'm going to talk about engineers. All right, prime example. So say an engineer, they've got the qualifications, they went to NC State, really good engineering school, passed with flying colors, and they're going to focus on mechanical engineering. Got the background, they passed the exam, they're ready to go do the application to get licensed. But you know what? I had a misdemeanor criminal conviction for, and let's just say theft. I was dumb. I was 18. I got this. Somebody tricked me into helping them out with this. And a true story: when I was in college, my roommate, who was not what I would call the smartest individual, got quote unquote tricked into helping somebody move a motorcycle at 4 o'clock in the morning in Tallahassee, Florida, and didn't realize that the guy was stealing it. So he, along with the other individual, got arrested. And I think he was about 20 at the time. Again, didn't say he was the smartest individual on the planet, but things like that does happen. Like people get taken advantage of, especially when they're younger. You get a criminal conviction for theft or grand theft, whatever the case may be, depending on the value of the vehicle or whatever is stolen. Could be a vehicle, could be whatever. So when it comes to something like a criminal conviction and you're trying to get a license, there's a number of nuanced things in there as well. 93B is a general statute that talks about criminal history being used by these licensing entities and how a criminal conviction could impact it, but may not. And it just depends on a lot of circumstances. The main one being what type of crime was it, and is the crime substantially related to that particular profession? Or is it a violent crime, or is it a crime of sexual nature? So there's a lot of different things that go in there. So you got to really get an understanding of what your background or how your background might impact your ability to get your professional license as well. So those are really the four main things, four main reasons to hire a professional licensing attorney. And we're based out of North Carolina, out of Raleigh. We cover the whole entire state. This is the only thing we do. We don't do family law. We don't do civil litigation. We don't do criminal defense. We don't do real estate. We don't do estate planning. We don't do anything other than professional licensing. So we can help you professional license defense. We can help you acquire a professional license if you need that. We've been doing this since 2019, got a great staff. So if you got any questions on anything professional licensing related, please give my office a call at 919-521-8810. You can also text that number. That's 919-521-8810, and you can get a free 15-minute discovery call with a member of my staff. If you want to check out the blogs on my website, it's northstatelawfirm.com. I got a lot of blogs and information on there, as well as on the YouTube channel, and that is North State Law's YouTube channel. You've obviously been familiar with that because you're watching this video. So reach out to us at any point. Be happy to help set you up with one of those free 15-minute discovery calls if the information that you're looking for is not already on the blogs or the websites. Or if you just want to call or text and say hi, that's perfectly fine too. So look forward to talking to you further on down the road, and thank you for stopping by. This is Nick Dogle with North State Law. Thank you once again. Bye-bye.